there's one thing on my mind that I feel like I should talk about, which is the attrition rate of lawyers. I think when I was a student, this topic was definitely widely discussed, and people would say that their plan or their goal is just to stay in practice for about 2 to 3 years, and then they'll jump in-house or basically look for alternative career paths, which definitely is an issue in the law profession, because it wouldn't make sense for students to go through the entire process of studying law, to go through the bar, taking the exams, and then go through training as a trainee, and thereafter plan to quit. It's as though your end goal from the beginning is to quit the profession and to quit this whole industry, which honestly sounds like a downer to me, because why would you start knowing that you quit in the end? And now I'm witnessing this whole situation firsthand. Basically, just a few weeks back, or maybe a month back, I learned that one of my colleagues was going to quit to go in-house, probably because of the bad hours. There were also several other colleagues in the wider team quitting as well. And even more recently, just a few days ago, another colleague told me that she had tendered her resignation even without finding a job, because she was so done with the hours and the demands of the clients and the demands of the bosses, which I completely empathize and completely understand, because it's almost as though we're expected to not have a life and expected to just be a slave to our client or a slave to the boss at times, which I think is quite unfair. And I always tell people how I think the legal profession is very paradoxical. It's like lawyers are always busy fighting for people's rights, trying to make sure that their clients have all the rights that they need, but oddly enough, we can never demand for our own rights in the face of a demanding client, which then leads to a demanding boss. Of course, this chain can be broken if your boss is able to push back on the client's deadline, but I think realistically, as a boss, and from the boss's perspective, when money is inflowing directly into their pockets and profit goes into their pockets, there is less incentive to push back on the client, because after all, you just know that if I get this work out, I'm going to get money in, right? And I'm not the one doing the work anyway. My junior, my associate, my trainee is going to be doing the work. So I'm not the one sacrificing my weekends. All I have to do is negotiate, promise, and from the perspective of a junior lawyer, I think the main sacrifice that the boss makes is to stay up late to so-called review and clear the work before it gets sent out to the client. But in terms of hard work and groundwork, most of it is definitely done by people like me. I definitely do feel a sense of dread when I know that, okay, on Friday night, then I have to work on Saturday or Sunday because the deadline is coming and I wouldn't be able to churn it out on Monday if it's due by Monday. Sometimes resentment also sets in if I feel that the deadline was an unreasonable one that the boss should have pushed back on. For example, just recently, the client asked for very comprehensive advice on a product, and this advice was going to encompass different areas of law. And when we were finally done with it, the advice amounted to about 40 pages, which means it's about 20,000 words. The client expected us to produce this advice within a day or two, which I felt was completely unreasonable, because she's not our only client, we have other work to deal with, and also just given the length and complexity of the matter, and the fact that it was a 20,000 words advice, just calls for more time, sensibly, unless we had to work late into the night or sacrifice our weekends, which we did. I definitely did my fair share of OT. I don't even know whether OT means anything in the legal industry, since it seems to be the norm. And also had to stay up late on the day of the deadline. I don't know what other considerations my boss had. Perhaps he was thinking of maintaining good relations with the clients, or just, to me, all I could see from my perspective is that this is just a form of client pleasing, which I feel is completely unnecessary, because given the context, we were already quite familiar with the facts and we had already shared our preliminary thoughts. So given the context, I felt that we could actually have pushed back the deadline by another 2 days so that all of us could live a little easier and have our weekends. Honestly, I felt quite shocked when my colleague told me that she was resigning because she had had enough. She had enough because she tried to push back on an unreasonable deadline, and the boss simply told her, maybe it's time for you to reconsider whether this team is suitable for you. Honestly, I felt that it was quite a harsh statement to make, and I know that this colleague of mine is really someone who is very diligent, very meticulous, and very responsible in her work, and I know that she does her absolute 100% or even 150% for every piece of work that she produces. And it's such a pity that instead of empathizing with her or trying to see how he can work around the matter, she had to be pushed to her limit and finally hit a breaking point where she decided that enough was enough. I think one thing that is lacking, I can't say for the whole industry, but just based on what I've been observing, is the inability to recognize talent. And I think I've spoken on this before, that I feel that bosses are not concerned with retaining talent. Essentially, I think it's just the mindset that the boss doesn't value you enough to do anything to retain you, even if it's just to make sure that we push back on unreasonable deadlines or just try to leave you untouched during your leave. I think these are like basic things that should be respected, because what's the point of giving us leave entitlements when we actually have to worry about our work during our leave and have to answer calls or do some urgent work. Okay, on this point I must say that recently my boss has been pretty okay in that I have been left untouched during my leave and certain urgent pieces of research have been passed on to a trainee or junior. But I can't say that this is always the case. There are times that I did choose to either sacrifice a leave or public holiday or weekend. So for instance, if I take leave on Wednesday, I will go on and have fun on my Wednesday, and then I realize that I have so much spillover and leftover work that I have to work on Saturday. So the leave entitlement is not exactly a leave, it's more like shifting my work day from a Wednesday to a Saturday, which is quite strange, right? It's like, is there even a point in going on leave? I might as well have worked on Wednesday so that I don't have to work on Saturday. But I guess this is just how the profession works. While I understand that the bosses cannot control the fact that clients are demanding, I feel that one of the duties of a good boss is to manage your clients' expectations. I think it takes having confidence in your work to know that it's okay to push back on a client if you are producing good work, because they can go elsewhere, they can get advice elsewhere, but the advice may not be that good, or they can get an agreement drafted elsewhere, but the agreement may not be drafted as well as you can draft it. So if you're confident about your skill level, confident that you can deliver good work, I don't see why we cannot push back on a client, especially if the client is being unreasonable. I think once you have accumulated sufficient experience, confidence and reputation, then I think this should be doable. And even if there's a worry that okay, the client might run away, but sometimes I think it's a balance, because if your clients don't run away, then your team will run away. I think one of it will go, because if your team is suffering for the sake of your client, then your client might stay but your team might disappear. And now as a junior lawyer, I really do feel the impact and the difference when a team member leaves, because whoever my boss hires, I know will never be as skilled as the person who left, or will never know the system or the way this team functions as well as the person who left. Because it is difficult to find someone to replace that team member and who is able to contribute efficiently from the get-go. There will definitely be a time period where they need to kind of learn the new area of law, learn the way things function and all these things. I think it would make more sense for the boss to try as best to keep whoever they trained. This is very achievable if you respect their time, if you don't overwork them, you don't work them too hard, and essentially respect that they are human too. They have a life, they have family, they have friends, they need time for other things apart from work. And I think if this can be achieved, then the attrition rate will definitely be lower and people will less likely consider, oh, should I move in-house, should I jump elsewhere, should I quit? All these thoughts will be secondary and people will just be focused on, okay, I love my job, I love what I do, and I'm going to do my best for it. Another factor that I feel contributes to this whole terrible work-life balance problem is the fact that it seems like there's always not enough people hired. Because if you hire sufficiently, there will always be enough people to cover someone, right? But it seems as though the boss is trying to hire as few people as possible to do as much work as possible, which I think shouldn't be the strategy. I think bosses should hire the number of people that allows the team to function on regular working hours and allows people to take their leave and have someone cover for them. So if every project has at least 2 associates on it, so if one is on leave, the other can cover. If you hire enough people to do the work, people wouldn't have to work overtime all that much or work during the weekends, because the manpower will simply be enough, right? I think that's the strange thing about this whole career, which is why can't bosses just hire one more person? Considering how much the bosses earn, I don't think that it costs a lot more to hire a person. Instead of trying to cut costs in terms of manpower, I think bosses should be focused on gaining revenue and ensuring that they are collecting their debts, which is something that I feel is extremely poorly done. It's so strange. There was once I told my friend that, you know, some clients actually do refuse to pay, and she was like, how can a client not pay a law firm? But the realities of it is that I think as a lawyer, we also do recognize that to try to go through the court process to get the amount that we should receive for our work is such a tedious and long drawn process, or that takes up so much resources, energy and time, that as a boss you would rather gain a new client, negotiate a new deal or something, as opposed to trying to collect the debt that the client owed. But I think there are things that bosses can do. So I have seen a boss who is very good at ensuring that he gets paid for whatever the work that is done. So for instance, when we provide a fee estimate for this job, once our time costs are beyond that estimate, or once we are doing work beyond that scope, I have a boss who will definitely bring this matter up to the client to inform the client and tell the client that you know, this is beyond our scope and we have already exceeded our fee estimate, just please confirm that you're willing to pay more for this particular piece of advice. And I think this is the right way of doing things, because if not, clients just take us for granted. I have another boss who doesn't do that at all, and we'll just simply provide the answers to the client and essentially bow down to the client and be like, you know, okay, we are going to provide this, we're going to help with this and everything. At the end of the day, our time costs definitely pile up and sometimes even go to 2 times or 3 times more than our fee estimate. It then becomes a very tricky situation as to how we are going to bill the client that much, because our fee estimate wasn't that high, or sometimes even worse when we have agreed to a fee cap that is only 1/4 of our total billable hours. It's a strange thing. I don't know what is going on in this industry, but it seems like we are working way too hard and not getting rewarded for the amount of effort and hours that we've put in for our work. What are my feels on my colleague's departure? The first thing that came to my mind was like, oh no, I'm going to have more work. And so I think it's a toxic and vicious cycle, in that the moment I knew that people were leaving, I too felt incentivized to leave, and I felt that I should begin searching for a new job. I should look for opportunities, because I don't want to be dealing with all the new files myself. I don't want to be handling the work myself. I don't want to be dealing with difficult things with new people who are not experienced enough, who are unable to guide me, or who don't even know how our team functions. I think realistically there will be a lot of adjustments to be made. The new team member would be as clueless as you. When my seniors leave, I will have less guidance. And I'm not exactly sure where I can turn to such problems, because if the boss doesn't address it, then I don't know. I think people will just find their own ways to work around it, which is either to leave the team or to leave the team. Like, there is no other better way out, I guess. At least for now, I don't see a better way out. I mean, the alternative is for me to stay on and work even harder and figure out all the things and hope for the best. Hope that the new people that he hires are good, skilled, knowledgeable, competent. And if there's anything in this profession that is worse than COVID, it is having your colleagues resign. I honestly hope the best for them, and I hope that they're really happier where they end up at. I wish there was a way to break this vicious cycle, or this mindset where the bosses believe that, okay, since they worked hard in the past when they were younger, now it's our time and our turn to work as hard. I think this vicious cycle should stop. We should learn from companies that are actually good workplaces and companies that actually care about employees' welfare, so that they can retain a talent that is helpful and useful for the company. It's not like these companies are making lower revenues or earning less. The main resource of a law firm is your people. So if your people are not happy, how can you produce good work and how can your company thrive? I hope that bosses will actually rethink and reflect on their mindset and consider whether their mindset still makes sense or not, and essentially wake up their idea. Although this sounds very harsh, but yeah, I think we cannot afford to be a dinosaur profession, or like continue this vicious mindset of like, okay, you know, taking pride in suffering, and since I suffered in the past, now it's your turn to suffer. I think this is just an illogical train of thought. Instead, we should think of how best can we be more efficient as a firm, how can we retain our talent, how can we make sure our employees are happy so that they produce good work and that we earn more revenue. So I think the focus is to increase the revenue instead of cutting the cost, which seems to be what bosses are most focused on, the cost and the cost and the cost. But good businesses and successful businesses out there are always focused on growing the revenue, growing the pie and growing the income, and not just cutting down the cost, because cutting down on the cost does not bring the industry further. This may sound like just a long rant, but I truly hope that there will be change someday. And I believe that in the newer generation of lawyers, like perhaps in my generation where people finally become bosses, then there could be a change. Assuming that we don't all leave and quit the profession and start our own businesses and venture elsewhere. Honestly, sometimes when I look at it, the brilliant people seem to leave the profession, choose a better life and earn as much as the bosses who stay, who are suffering with the terrible hours. Okay, such a long rant. But yeah, hope that my sharing gave you some insight of the attrition experience. It's a first-hand sharing of how I feel about my colleagues resigning from the team. If you're a student or considering pursuing law, this is something that you should probably think about, because this is the reality of the profession. This is real, this is ongoing, that people start to quit. And unless you are someone who is super passionate about law and can take a lot of hardship, you're willing to work super long hours, you're going to go through a lot of struggles and difficulties, you might want to reconsider whether this profession is actually for you. That's all. See you in my next video. Bye!